Okay, so this video is just to explain a little bit about the introduction worksheet that you're going to work on and then submit to the assignment folder. So you're going to answer 6 different questions about the first 5 chapters of To Kill a Mockingbird. The first question that you're going to answer is number 1, and I want you to think about the setting. The setting is the feelings created by the setting also. So it's not just where and what time it takes place, but it's also a little bit about the mood, the feeling of where the story is taking place. But for this question, I want you to think about things like I want you to describe the weather as it's described in the book. What is the town like? What time period? Where is the town? What year, or approximately what year are the events of the novel taking place? So for question number 1, I want you to gather and write down information about the setting. For question number 2, I want you to write a little bit of background information about the Finch family. Who are the members of the Finch family? What are their names? Can you describe them physically? How old are they? What are some important characteristics of the members of the Finch family? For number 3, I want you to talk a little bit about other characters besides the Finch family. So think about some other characters that were mentioned in chapters 1 through 5. And do the same thing. Describe those characters physically, some characteristics, some personality, qualities of those characters. For question number 4, I would like for you to give me a little bit of a history of the Radley family. What have you learned about the Radley family from chapters 1 through 5? Next, I want you to think a little bit about the language. You'll notice as you read that some of the language in To Kill a Mockingbird is a little bit different than the standard language that you're used to hearing, standard English that you're used to hearing. A lot of this is reduced forms. Especially in the South, a lot of native English speakers will have simpler or smaller or shorter forms. And I would like for you to make a list of at least 20 of those. Explain their meaning, and also please write down where you found them in the book, what chapter, and give me a page number if you can as well. Just a couple examples. Ain't would be an example. Ain't means I am not, or he is not, or she is not. Reckon, gotcha, talking, gonna, wanna, doing, going. You can use those examples if you want to on your own and explain them, but you can't use ain't because I explained that one. So you could use those examples if you can find them in the book and then add some of your own to that. For question number 6, then, you need to discuss some key literary terms. Some of these you are going to be able to answer for chapters 1 through 5, and then some of them you will not be able to answer just simply because we haven't gotten to that part of the book. But you do need to think about all of these literary terms and how they apply to Kill a Mockingbird, how you can define them using examples from To Kill a Mockingbird, because that will be part of the test at the end of the unit. But for now, for this introduction worksheet, I just want to make sure that you understand these literary terms and that you can start to find examples of the literary terms in To Kill a Mockingbird. So we already talked a little bit about setting. Setting is the time and the place, but also the atmosphere. In other words, the feelings created by the setting or the location, the description of the setting. Is it described in a happy way or a sad way or a tired way or an angry way? What kind of feelings do you get from the description of the time and the place? And that would be the setting. Next would be the genre. The genre just means what kind of novel is it? What kind of piece of literature is it? Is it an action? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Is it a horror? Is it a documentary, autobiography, things like that? So I want you to think about what genre do you think To Kill a Mockingbird is. Conflict means where is the drama coming from in the novel? Where is the action coming from? Who's fighting each other, or what ideas are fighting each other? There are 4 main types of conflict that we find in literature. The first is man versus man. In man versus man, it's basically 2 human beings against each other. The next is man versus nature. This should seem obvious. In this, it's man fighting something from nature. So imagine a man who's lost in the wilderness and he has to survive. That would be an example of man versus nature. Or a family whose home is destroyed by a hurricane and they have to figure out how to put things back together. That would be another example. The next type of conflict is man versus himself. In man versus himself, a person is fighting something inside them, dealing with a problem that's inside them, their own emotions, their own issues inside. And then finally, the last type of conflict is man versus society, in which case a person is fighting against something that a society believes, some kind of issue that the whole entire community might be supporting. Characters. Characters are just the main people who are represented in the story, the people who are part of the events in the story. The climax is the point of greatest intensity, where the drama or the action of the story is at its highest point, the peak, in other words. The denouement is a French term that means the aftermath. In other words, this is kind of the unraveling of all the complex ideas that have been explored in the plot. After the climax, it's kind of bringing everything back together, bringing everything to feel like it's finished and that it's resolved. The point of view can be this would be who is narrating the story and how are they telling it the story. Are they telling it from a first person point of view, in other words, I, me, my, or are they telling it from a third person point of view, he, she, it, they, and that can sometimes change how the story comes across. Next we have theme. Theme would just be the fundamental and universal ideas that are explored in the story, the really big ideas that are explored in the story. So just some examples of that would be love, friendship, revenge, reconciliation. So as you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I want you to think about what big ideas, what universal ideas do you notice being explored in To Kill a Mockingbird? Irony. Irony is saying or doing something that actually has the opposite meaning or effect of what you want it to be. Symbolism or imagery is mental pictures. In other words, the way that symbolism would be a meaning that goes beyond the literal meaning. So, for example, let's say that if you see a red sign on when you're driving on the road, and generally that sign represents stop. It's a symbol for wanting you to stop. Or sometimes when we see a sun, it doesn't necessarily mean the sun in the sky, but it might mean energy, like something that gives us energy. Imagery would be mental pictures. The author is using descriptions that are so vivid that we can actually see what the author is describing in our minds. And sometimes the author uses similes, metaphors, and personifications to symbolize things or to paint imagery for the reader. A simile and a metaphor are both making a comparison. Two things are being compared. With a simile, you use the words like or as. With a metaphor, you don't. So, for example, in a simile, I might say something like this. Her hair was like a waterfall. So here I'm using the word like to compare hair and waterfall. That's a simile. For a metaphor, I might say something like her hair cascaded down her back in waves. So I'm not using like or as, but I'm still comparing hair to water-like qualities, cascade, waves. So it's also a comparison, just not as direct of a comparison. And then finally, personification. Personification is when you make an inanimate object, in other words, something that's not alive or something that's not a human being, you give it qualities of a person. You give it qualities of a human being. So let's say, for example, I said something like this. The branches of the tree waved in the wind as if to say hello. Trees don't have hands. Trees don't wave hello to us, but this image kind of gives us a picture of what the tree was looking like, gives it some person qualities. That's called personification. The plot is just the events of the book or the story, what happens. And then the last literary term here is exposition. Exposition narrates the information that's necessary to understand the characters. This is kind of like background description that the author gives you so that you can understand the story a little bit better. Okay, so now you're going to complete the introduction worksheet on your own. For question number 6, you're not going to be able to discuss all of the literary terms for question number 6, not yet anyway, because you don't have all the information since you've only read chapters 1 through 5, but I want you to write down as many as you can think of. When you finish completing the introduction worksheet, there's an assignment folder and you can submit it to that assignment folder.